some gears.
I think I've also received it from the two tutors of His Holiness.
Da tande di lojong tsege di zababote pyogi ane lama ane kadamba ane langri thangba doji singi konga zay shaba jirabas.
This is a text, the 8-verse mind training is a text that was composed by a Tibetan Lama, Kadampa Lama, called Langri Tamba Doji Senge.
O ta kong kiru nindenji chungbarabas korang ngune tane dus zomba zammayi bar korang ngus mi zenali ya lalen kayane ane shibujigi bet lojongi nyamle ane bet changme yongs tada bachigi ane nyamle bachi chungbarab kiru nindenji chungbarabas.
This Langri Tamba Doji Senge was very well known for being not just a great scholar, but somebody who's also a great practitioner. So these 8 verses are not simply something that he composed, but they reflect the way in which he himself lived his life.
Ta kongi shichesati ane joji debongara atisha pele pep ane domden jawe jungne ne ma gyu kadam kunche sumne ma gyuje ane ji sabatan jachewe ki lamrimgi nenga tikiti ane nyamsu langne de zomba chirabas.
So he composed this on the basis on the foundation of teachings that on the side of the extensive practices and also the profound teachings that he received in a lineage that went back to the great Indian master Atisha, who came to Tibet, and then from Atisha these teachings were passed down through his main disciple Domtompa, and then the three so-called Kadampa brothers and so on down to him. No.
Ta digi menga gi kungti sange jomdende gi sungla tuyundu kandichil tubaresana tandarang anzin dama taba ta sheranyimul tubaresana choyachires.
Then, since this is a teaching that must be traced back to the Buddha, if we ask, well, what is the source in the Buddha's teachings for this these 8 verses, the 8-verse mind training? So I think that we can say that it traces back to the source for this is the Heart Sutra that we were just reciting together.
Oh, dil tube ane yusen kandichi yes labaina. Oh, yumi sherage parudu chimbatela ngode dunyi girimba. Bedon ngondo girimba sene ngode shukden yin gejachi tuas. Ngode dunyi girimba tongba nigu koti ngus tembeki tsikti che. Pungbo ngabo teta yang ranshingi tongba namba yang taba jesu tao su tongba nyi su le tongba nyi shemayi tongba nyi le gyan su shemayi no sene ngus sebu yubche. Ta wana ane lam drebe rimba lam gi rimba ti ane sharanyi bu kandis tembare slabaina tanda ngaranche gate parasam gate bodhi sayatigi chi yong chani shana lam ngati tenki yubche ane kumung mayimba gi chanju sembe gi dene gu tohne lam druzu shebaina lam ngabutela sachu te jarne sachu lam ngati nalaya gate para gate sayati 두기 여다봐 텐데 인도 뭐대 돈이 기름바 배동 원도 기름바 어다티 아니 저자티 실라샤네 로종치게디 다 중벌바 쓰나 초야레스.
Now, why would I say that the Heart Sutra is the source for this teaching, can be considered the source for this 8-verse teaching? It's because the perfection of, so the Heart Sutra is a perfection of wisdom sutra, right? So the perfection of wisdom sutras, their what they explicitly teach is emptiness, and then what they teach in a hidden way is the stages of the path to enlightenment. So the way that they explicitly teach emptiness, we can see from the Heart Sutra, where it says the five aggregates also are empty of inherent nature, and it goes on to say form is empty, emptiness is form, form is not other than emptiness, emptiness is not other than form, and so forth. So they're very clearly and very explicitly talking about emptiness. And then the as for how the hidden meaning of that sutra is the stages of the path, well, when we get to the mantra, the Tayata Gati Gati Para Gati Parasangati Bodhisoha, in general, we can understand that as referring to the five paths, path of accumulation and so forth. And then specifically, if we think in terms of the Bodhisattva basket of teachings or collection of teachings, then it can also be seen to be referring to the 10 Bodhisattva grounds. And so all of that, all of those teachings and ideas, they're all the foundation and basis for the 8 verses.
다 랑루 담보 도지 승기기 로종 체계기 식신이랑 로당 토네 마 아니 조자티 아니 콩티 야또 버지인 뱅고 파발루두기 우마린제 청월에 직 도도와스 야세 전부 시월하기 쫀줄래야 직 도도와스 땅무스 땅아래 신체 테레스 안티 마임비 슝몽부질이야 다 토기여 발랍둘라 소바텐들 토기여 땡데레스
Then besides that, in terms of the literal words of the text, we can say, I mean, according to my own knowledge, certainly it traces back to the precious garland that was composed by the great Indian master Nagarjuna, also the Bodhicharavatar of Shantideva. And there would be other ones, I think, like, for example, the Shiksha Samuchaya, also by Shantideva. So, and I think there would be many other texts that it can be traced back to in terms of, the Indian masters.
다디 전주 선배 로종기 냠랭지 내일 송기 여바 인자 아니 남주 전주 선배 domba 쉬베 qabla 아니 저하지 여레스 전주 선배 데네다 마모터삼스 스네 저하지 여레스 전주 선배 domba 쉬베 qabla
No.
아니 중세 퇴라 중세 삼라스니 야 렌지 잡아레스 대답에 전주 선배 데네도 가르래 전주 선배 마모도 가르래 사티 마모스나 자외 슝디 인사레스 자외 슝 마모도 가르샤 그랬으나 아니 상계 좀내 송간 유르 난기 팔친 보트 죽드레스 누드 패고체 아니 전주 선배 내내도 가르샤스나 아니 파바 토메 긴제베 장사드레스 전주 선배사 당에 팔친 보트 둘이야 삼노 땅바이 때때스 내주 고송 아니 파바 토메 긴제베 전주 선배사 파바 토메 긴제베 년사이요래 년두기 사이요래 전주 선배사이요래 장사양 액때때스 고송 될 삼노 땅바이 인스네 랭자기 요레스 다 딩잉이야 니기 아니 츠기 저자티 시드사 차기 요 땡데레스 파진보트 주대다 장사티
No. And so then here, because we're talking about the essential points of the Bodhisattva's practice, so when we're taking the Bodhisattva vows, then the one form of taking the vows anyway, you're asked the question, have you heard the Bodhisattva Pitaka or Bodhisattva basket of teachings and the root texts of the Bodhisattva path and so forth, Bodhisattva vehicle. And so what you would say formally in reply to that would be, I have heard a little and I have understood a little. So you're asked, have you heard and have you understood? So you say, I've heard a little and I've understood a little. And so what this is talking about is the question that's being asked is, have you heard the Bodhisattva, the Bodhisattva set of teachings, or basket of teachings that would refer to the six perfection volumes, which is the Rinpoche, what's that? The Avatamsaka, isn't it? Yeah, the Avatamsaka Sutra, and then with the so then besides that, talk. You're being asked, have you read the texts such as the Asanga's Bodhisattva Bhumi, and so or the grounds of the Bodhisattva. So Asanga composed several texts, like the grounds of the here and so forth. So they're talking about the grounds of the Bodhisattva, and so you're saying that I've heard a little of that, and I've understood a little of that, and so that is really the foundation.
야나 디바이나 도티 파부칠 시타 개체 츠도와스 롭종 몽고 티토네 지도와스 롭티체 도티 파부체니 셰베기 아니 루규 몽보 아니 도스 나란즈 자바중이나 시체 도스 르무코엔 아니 제하여 버텐데 지도와스 인도네시아 그 보르부둘라야 디 르바치글이야 도티 파부체니 셰베티 용도와스
Because of the
자바중이 낭시 자바중이 말해 자바중이 낭신기 대생 르모 도티 파부체니 셰베 루규
No. In China, this sutra that I just mentioned, the Avatamsaka Sutra, is really considered very important. They study it a lot, and when you go to China, you can see temples where, just like in our temples, we have what do you call it, pictures up on the wall depicting the 12 deeds of the Buddha. So they have these images up on the wall that depict stories that are recounted in the Avatamsaka Sutra, and you also have some of that in the Borobudur. If you go to Borobudur in Indonesia, so there they have something like that there as well.
다티 공티 로종 체계기 시조사티 디임을 차샤 다티네 로종 체계 들라 아니 단단 가란스 디나라 다네 sem제 탐제리 이신도 빌레라베 돈조드르베 삼바이 다두 제바 짐버 쇼스네 강갈이야 쇼스요레스 남규 차체이나 쇼 대가랑 체네 마 아니 카티낭그레스
So that's the foundation, the basis for the teaching. And then if you look at the actual 8 verses themselves, then each verse finishes with the word sho in Tibetan. So it's like saying, may I. So when it's being taught, then it's always taught on the basis of each verse saying, may I.
아니 야와탐제 캠베 두지 찍라 로종 체계 찍 송베 갑라 쇼세와 딜레짱 곰 세암 랍 세야기 두디 경고 탐제 캠베 또 공바지 셰제 패치 쇼 말다 곰 패치 디임베 예송스
No.
곰 세 디임베 예송스
No.
디시락 찍디 누바차도 와스
No.
디 로종 야제나나도 와스 로종 야제나나도 와스 아니 제리 양의 로종 야자도 심주제 디체베갈 곰 레민도
No.
랍르시
Loves. No.
또 랍사야디 시부지기 누바도 와스 쇼 사이트 몰람을 봤어
No.
또 랍스기는 당가 장기 체버 봤어 정달 지기 있으라고 봤어 직딜은 누바 시부지도 왔어 다는 sem제 탐제를 이신노불 레라베 돈조 주베 삼바이 따도 제바 짐발랍 간도 수단 로베스 다니 꼴레멘다 샤나 삼바 타바이 저도 제바 짐발랍 스나 아니 소소소소려야 당에 뒤쳐버다 당에 뒤쳐버다 사이지 디 야와탐제 게미티 시탄네 버차도 왔으나 어떤데 송송스 아니 디토네 로티나스 카사 카티나송스
No. And now His Holiness, often when he's teaching this, he makes the point that even though in the verse that with the form of this these verses that we're familiar with, they all end up with, may I, which is expressing like the prayer to be able to practice in that way. Like, for example, anyway, uh, like in the first verse, it talks about, may I uh, cherish all sentient beings who are more precious than a wish fulfilling jewel and so forth. So His Holiness mentions that or expresses the opinion, the feeling that it's more effective to say maybe uh, I shall train in this way or I shall meditate in this way. And and he mentions how it's that's how it says it in the there's a set of Lojong texts called the Lojong Gyatsa, so like hundreds of Lojong texts. And so I actually looked in that text, and it says, "Train, I shall train." So somehow that's much more powerful than simply making the prayer. May I be able to act in this way? Maybe may I be able to do this and that? But to say, "I'm going to train in this way." So His Holiness, when he's teaching it, he teaches it in that way.
어, 랑루 당바 도지 생기 고란기 당보 좀 백갑라 쇼트 좀 요사마레 랍생인데 좀 요사레.
So most likely when Langri Tamba Doji Sengye composed the text, he didn't say, may I. It looks like what he actually would have said was, I shall train in this way. I shall practice in this way.
너 디치 캔과체 다테네 다 어, 어, 랑루 당바 도지 생기 제베 로종 치게 대양 알레 당보 란진지 다 셴진지 니게나네 셴진지디 개첨부 임비규체 셴진지디 개체 이나 아니 로종베 중루텔라 토마 랑숭기 랑기 귤리아 또소 뇨모께서나 디 고탕기 동렌치단게 랑숭 디 랑숭 야고지 톱소나 에네 유르셴라 미베 에네 제시팜베 이혼도 따야기 까베 넬리아 동렌치베 림바 까베 넬 동렌치베 림바 군조블 때네 티케티 에네 주구주구데 숄가직데 돈담라 때네 왔다 도스 chen 로존스 얘기 덤 되는지 이사레스.
No. And if we were to kind of summarize these 8 verses, because this is, Mayana mind training, so he starts off with something which is really important, which is talking about how essential it is to cherish others rather than cherishing oneself. So he talks about that, and then on that basis, he talks about how important, if you're going to be of benefit to others, then how important it is to uh, guard your own mind from the mental afflictions and so on. So then he talks about that. Then he spends several verses talking about, on that basis, how to handle various situations with other sentient beings. Finishing the 7th verse with talking about the taking and giving practice, Donglen. And then the last, so those are all the sort of the practices to be done on a conventional level. And then the last verse is how to practice on the ultimate level.
뒤에 초돔 체베이나 장주 샘기 냠렌다 동반이기 냠렌이기 날 뒤버지 레샤스.
So what that means is all of this teaching comes under 2 headings. There's how to practice emptiness, how to meditate on emptiness, how to practice bodhicitta.
어, 다와나스 장주 샘 귤 마케베 케버 체베 탑려야 안에 윤대 명아 등주권 로종수다 다셴냠제권 로종수지 얘기되베 나네 달렌데 다셴냠제권 로종수 조체네 숭기요레 디인자 다네 샘제 탐제라 이신 노부 렐하베 텐초 주베 삼바이 따도 제바 짐발랍 샌디기 다 그래서 조디 가와질리야 다 삼당고도스나 현생인데 개첨부, 현생인데 짜첨부, 현생인데 렉조 탐지기 짜와임바. 다 디토달이야 이신의 노블 레장 하버지레 사야디 다 다스 몰롱 유드체네 가는 den샤버지 마임바. 유천시에베 토네. 다 드니치 고도와스. 소스길이야 내버게 고도와스.
For generating bodhicitta, the awakening mind of bodhicitta, there are two ways. One is by the sevenfold cause and effect instruction. The other one is equalizing, exchanging self and others. And here the emphasis is on generating bodhicitta through equalizing and exchanging self and others. And it's for that reason that he starts off in this verse, as you can see on the board. So determined to obtain the greatest possible benefit. That verse, anyway, you can see that one, right? So in that verse, he's talking about how others are so important. They're extremely important. They're the source of everything good, all kinds of goodness, any kind of goodness that we can experience or achieve. And in fact, they're so precious and important that they're far more valuable and precious than even a wish fulfilling jewel. And so this, when we're talking about bodhicitta here, then we're not just talking about like making a prayer to be able to think that way and so forth. We're talking about really understanding the reasons why sentient beings are so precious and reaching a point where you feel a deep sense of certainty and you're completely convinced about it through reasoning.
제단디 슝 망부시라야래. 슝측 망부야래. 망부지도 나를 놀라 ኘ금인도. 다 나래 놀야 ኘ대바. 시라기 셈리야 로보. 지기 다 등원해를 했으면 지기. 디치디 준주나를 칭이지. 나라 남주 섬단대 땡에 계란 소리야. 다다가 슈비나. 셈제 굴레 중앙이 마오 산게 룹다쇼 챈디 니라 빼첸다 다다 긴규 지무통세 디치디 넘치무 쇼지도 같은 섬거여스 셴 셈제 생엔들이야 에너지 뭐네다는 90채 받지다 셴 셈제 생엔들이야 에너지 팸바르야디 셴 팸바사 제야디 하루도 산게기 콤판데 루이스 타도 산게기 콤파 요쇼스 배는 쳇디가랑라 양스 마오 산게 루다쇼 쳇디니라 빨첸단스 루다와 셈기바 네메바 쳇르와 롱주체와 유수강가 쳇디니라 빨첸단스 빨첸부터 두조레 자당 생게디 깨다 땀년자 춘제 자당스 안에 병원에 미제디 끼부지 여대 기다마지 생인데 강가 섬전시는 때려대버지래 근데 인자 자다 긴규 지미동스 등어스 거라 통고도 왔어 근데 인자 섬전시 생인데 내가부터 타도 니가라야 하장기 편도 첨부 까진 첨부지래스 선네 어떤지 준juk 찍디난 두았어
There are many verses and quotes that we could bring up to give a real sense of just how precious and kind sentient beings are. And personally, there aren't so many that I know myself, but there are a couple of verses in the Bodhicharavatar which I've always found myself thinking about and which I would like to mention to you. So there's one verse which talks about how precious and kind the sentient beings are by first of all mentioning that of course we need the sentient beings in order to achieve enlightenment, but never mind about achieving enlightenment. Even in this life, everything good comes from the sentient beings. So having a healthy body, a happy mind, being free of illness, having a long life, having a lot of resources, fame, a good reputation. In fact, so having a happy life or having an unhappy life completely depends upon the sentient beings. And these are things that we can see. So never mind enlightenment. Yes, of course, the sentient beings, it's from the sentient beings that we achieve enlightenment. But even in the short term, just this life, everything good comes from the sentient beings. So the sentient beings are the source of every kind of happiness in this life and everything after this life.
단단가란스 썸네나라 nga kale japchi yonden dine chi shingi sachi tisu kale japchi shinshawa rawji samlo korgodo was nga kale japchi nga gishe tangba is sachi nga re kale japchi en gishe tangba rawji.
So we have this tendency to think that any kind of education we might have, knowledge and so on we think, I worked hard to get that. That's why I have that, because I worked so hard for it. Like we might become Geshe and think, I became Geshe because I was prepared to work hard to get that. We might think, I worked really hard for 19 years to get this.
당원에 다네잖아 기계 진짜 직봐 초고 첨부 되게 되면은 맞추고기 로추고기 뒤 좋아야지 면도다스 등원해를 봤어.
In fact, it would not have been possible without one's teacher, without the classmates, without that big community. It wouldn't have been possible. So it wasn't just like because I worked hard.
다 총바지 나타가랬어.
If you're a business person, then it's the same, isn't it?
레제바 첨 통보지 있나 내도 다가나랬어.
Yeah, if you're
레제바 탐보 또 politician 공무청부.
No, it's not. Like if you're somebody like up there as a prime minister, or a great politician of some kind.
강가 심전시할 때 되지 땐데를 봤어.
All of that depends completely upon the sentient beings, doesn't it?
다 때네 증원의 단에게 단당하란 척이 루부대단 생에데 떼지마다 준 람사면간 로고도 왔어.
Then if we have any kind of like discomfort physically, immediately we want to go to the hospital, don't we?
심전시할 때 오고도 왔어.
And for that, you depend upon other sentient beings, don't you?
멤버를 떼고도 매열을 떼고도 내열을 떼고도 되게 되는 알루부터 당생인데 영어도 왔어.
We depend upon the doctor, we rely upon the nurses and all of the other staff there. So our health in that way depends upon others, doesn't it?
니렉이 르브 초탱기 칼라 춘제디 용수 줘봐 정말로 알레탕고 외계인이 말 차샤 큐니 샘젠스탄 큐니 만데바기 베티 뜻 가서 그래 가서 땡기 여벌 차샤 이나야 레드다 싱도되다 되게 샘젠 뭐지글 때네 용이마데 세버르와스.
And on a daily basis, all of the food that we eat, and even if you're a vegan, so you're not eating anything that comes from animals and so forth, living beings, but still, the rice that you eat, the fruit that you eat, and so forth, these all come from the kindness of sentient beings.
가서 먹어 가서 나도 개체시도 추들어왔어. 추디는 가서 소자 열었어.
So then there is the water, which we consider so important. So think of all of the bacteria and the life in the water.
다 딘데 내주지 섬 땅바 있나? 샘전 현승에 그 같은 전부 쇼지랬어.
If you think about these things, then you see that the sentient beings are so kind.
다 되네. 나란 속에 지다 팬도 첨부 임바도 고고 첨부지 임바 인다 아니 간주 텔이야 팬바 두고래 사야데 지단 로탄지래 이 가상키니 시번나시 강바래 괜찮래 되게 된가라서 공고 첨부 인다 자 첨부지 장마스 개잡 미치기 여러봤어
mm,
다 이나야 텔이야 나라도 삼는 날 찍도 왔어 강바다 괜찮다 뒤주 오늘 다내기 펜베 삼 펜고 삼바데 요 말했대 내고 삼바데 자네 요 말았어
mm,
콜 네버 채고 삼바데 큐니 요 말았어 어떤데 인상 아주 됐어 다 셈젠디 까브레 셈젠 신다데 아니 콜 네버 채고 삼베 텐데지 등수 친해지야 누웠어 뒤까지 전부 뭐 간듯이 삼고를 했어 아직 야 좋아지 누웠어
Pengo sambe samlo di menahin.
어
Oh, lare. No, and so yeah, so when you think about it, you see that they are so kind and so helpful, and it seems only natural that in response to that, that we should try to help them. So now, like in the case of having a house and jewelry and so on, they don't have from their side. Of course, they don't have the wish to help us, but they do, which we consider so important. But they don't have any wish to help us, but they also don't have any wish to harm us, do they? Whereas with the sentient beings, how can you think about all their kindness when they don't have the intention to help us and might even want to harm us? How do you think of them as being kind in that case?
레스 셈쟁기 네베 삼노 유니기 셈쟁지기 차셰지기 전에 라사가 다니지 따버봤어 이나야 그 네베 뒤때다 페베 뒤때 나도 독시 삼단계이나 페베 뒤때 망아요레스 무스 팽기 매나야 유인의 페마 망부시고요레스 그 직선나 람가 쓰고요레스
Mm,
그 신가답고요레스
mm,
그 소자 주고요레스
mm,
딩 먼저 배줬던 게 알았어.
mm.
근데 인사 유인의 뱀배차 싫어요 알았어.
Even the person who harms us and who we label enemy, if you think about it, the amount of times that they harm us is much less than the time that they help us. So that person who's harmed us indirectly, it could be that they're helping us in many ways. Like for example, constructing the roads that we use and working in the factories which we rely upon, and so forth.
그래. 근데 망고지 먼저 배줬던 게 알았어.
So we make use of all of those, don't
락
we?
서샵 먼저 배줘 못한 거 알았어.
La,
락 서샵에 망고지 먼저 배줬던 거 알았어.
la, la.
다 락이 다 소소 막아서기 다티기
Ale, jadi,
그래. 소자 주연애래.
mm,
어
no.
신가답이연애래.
Mm, mm,
람가서연애래. 근데 망고지 나란서 배 유백권에 배줘다네. 편도 전부 연거 알았어.
mm. So that person who we call the enemy, they can help us indirectly in many ways. Like, for example, building factories, working in factories, building roads, uh, tilling what do you call it, tilling the fields and so forth, working the fields and so forth.
어 규제의 현다직을 차샤바이나 장원의 직 소소 남주 막아서지 있나야 그내 깨고서는 주중 이슈 접시 따와라지 말아봤어
Mm,
다 딘데 지기 둘이야 공롱톤 지 용바를 봤어 딘데 인자
mm,
디 내베 뒤디 용화탕 안에 깨와네 유께저 샤베이나 안에 깨와 오만 나서 팬 따베차 시부지 열어봤어 배주 파마야 제 용바를 봤어
mm. Then another way of reasoning about this is that that person that we don't like for whatever reason, they're not going to, if they don't like us, then they're not going to be like 24 hours a day thinking about how they don't like us and how they want to harm us and so forth. Sometimes they will be thinking that way, but not all the time. So that's one way in which, the amount of time when they want to harm us is like less than, is not so much anyway. And then in particular, if you think about previous lives, there's so many occasions, must be so many occasions in the past lives when they've helped us so much. Like, for example, as our parents, as our father and mother.
음. 다 딘데 인자스 에네 셈전 셴 생긴데 내가부터 터두려야 에네 지 편도 정보 지인배 차네 네 델자와 제거해야 돼. 다 유천데 말했으네. 어디랬다. 그래서 도도 티스.
And so, to summarize then, because other sentient beings are so helpful to me and so kind in the short term and in the long term, for that reason, from my side, I really need to cherish and be, to feel affection towards them.
다 란진징이 경고 돌이야. 아니 게세 좀 쉬어라. 찌찌도 왔어. 담 지나는 뭐월 디나네 나레심베 찌찌 슈나스. 어?
Then again in the Bodhisattva, there might be many verses where he talks about the faults of self-cherishing, but there's one in particular that really appeals to me, which I would like to mention here.
지대단나 체와 강요도. 지대단나 체와 강요도. 생긴데 샘델리 중 너제. 송델리 중 너제. 지대단나 체와 강요도. 직다 동에스. 다 세멜리 중에 아니 중에 넣어봐. 중심 넣어봐. 사추 멜룽 중심 넣어봐. 직다 동에 칭에 여기 봤다. 카르카리 여베 있나스. 강에 카르카리 여베 있나스. 디시 규지 열어봤다. 규지. 규 매봐 되게 연구 말아봤어. 다 되게 규가 타도 규도 가발을 토그래 쓰스나. 당지암 란진질 토그지레스. 란진지다 당진이를 토그지레스. 어? 직다 동에 칭에 여겨봐. 디그 다도 좀 발레 총나스. 대한다베기 란진지다 당진데 다 뭐네 자네 레드티레스. 레첸 대고 달아 지시자스. 당원에 자네 내 탄다바도 짜지 못지데 나랑 닝리야. 그 남도 땡자에 되베. 아니 뱅에 짜지 못지데 한테 딩잉이데 너바 탐제 중에 아니 시 쪼지레데도 와스. 따띵원에 내 동네 책고도 우세. 어딘지도 와스. 따코 섬단에 아니 델리아 냐바지 냐고도 와스.
What Shantideva says is that any harm that we might receive in this world from animate sources, other beings and so on, and any harm that we might experience that comes from inanimate sources, like, for example, the harm from the four elements: earth, water, fire, air. All of that, if you think about it, it all has to have a cause. It's not going to happen without a cause. That harm is not going to happen without a cause. And if you go into the causes and really trace it back to the final ultimate source, you'll find that it's grasping at itself and cherishing oneself. Those are the real enemy, the great demon, which is the real enemy, our real enemy. So, in other words, thinking I'm so important, which we do tend to think, I'm so important, that way of thinking of ourselves is so important, is what's the source of all of our suffering and all of our problems. And so we need to really think about that until we're completely certain about it.
디 삼노데 다야라 시작한데 고레스나 디기기 듀티 가와임바 둥에기 듀티 미가와임바 딜리야 이체도 녀토치 고레스.
Now, to be able to get to that point, you really do need to be able to think about happiness comes from virtue and suffering comes from non-virtue.
음. 개화성인데 간들에 셴라 펜바. 딘디치기 돈에 개화스가 도와스. 셴라 내가 찍을 때는 미개화스. 너는 미개와 주셔야 돼. 셴일 루소 롱절이야 내가 찍을 때 돈에 미개와 돼. 셴게 도와스.
Mm,
어?
mm. So if we think about what that means when we say virtue, so to do something virtuous is to do something which helps others. When you do something non-virtuous, when you do something to harm others, that's what we call non-virtue. Like, for example, the 10 non-virtues, which are all to do with harming sentient beings, whether it's harming their bodies, whether it's harming their possessions. It means harming others.
응? 다 딘디치기 돈에 게 미겔레 디두기 용기여바티 니주 딜레 아니 신에 아니 더 원해다내기 셴성인데 자침부터 닝구 리베트는 라산 남다기 셴라 자와 생긴디 디지기 자와 임바 오다 되게 그 주센다 버치레스
And so thinking in that way, then, the way thinking about those points in relation to virtue and non-virtue, we can see very clearly how a sense of pure affection for other sentient beings and caring for others, how that is really the root and the source of all of our happiness.
다 딘데지기 주센디 실레샤네 측제 당보디 다 돈다디 딘데지 땡겨래 같은 성거였어
And it's thinking along those lines, I think, that give you this first verse, which is
민두 민두
anyway that first verse that we mentioned just now.
코 쳐바치기 냠내 찍고 찍다 레버 찍고 찍 레면도 왔어 지조 찍이 지 니지 두당 털이나야 디 개첨부레도 왔어 최다 만레베 털이나야 디 측제데 개첨부레도 왔어
And the essence of this verse is really important for, I don't know, for our community and our social life together in general. It's not just something that has some kind of significance in relation to Dharma.
간다르 잠불린디 찌기찌기를 땡대요 봐 셔누기 링텐티기 정말 찌기찌기를 뺀조고 돌을 땡대요 봐 셰영고 돌을 땡대요 봐 밑에 디두기철 땡대요 봐디 셰베 토네 지소랑을 뭐네 타네기 지 디지주야 지소랑을 펜드주야디 아니 소소 잠불린 디들 데베링기 다 디지기 싸워지 차기요데 곧 다가도 디두가스 등에 측이하고 찍듯이 쉬시면서 간다 티레 계속 티레스
No. You know, when you think about East and West, wealth and having a happy life or an unhappy life, the education, learning, and so on, it all works well when we have this sense of like caring for others and affection towards others. So thinking in that way really also gives you a sense of how important others are.
environment such was that 계속 better was
Yeah, so thinking about the environment, it's the same kind of thing, isn't it?
나는 선전 탐지를 이신노를 내라고 돈 주르베 삼바이 따도 제바 점발랍스
Yeah, so that
디 푸도 디 아이패드 디야 푸도
I know. Yeah, so that's the first verse then. Determined to obtain the greatest possible benefit from all sentient beings who are more precious than a wish-fulfilling jewel. I shall hold them most dear at all times. So it's got it as love no.
데 랍티도에
Love do.
야 다때네 측한이바티 강도 수다 드롭에서 다니 군레 맨다시 셴라 삼바 타바 초도 제바 짐발랍스 디행문에는 내가 첨부지레스
Then the second verse it says, "Wherever I am," and
레 지간 당부든 돌텐레
no,
지간 당부 측제 당부 쇼로고 당부든 돌텐레
no. The first verse is a kind of like a summary of the practice of the whole, or let's say of the whole text. Then the second verse, which I also think is very important. So it says, "Wherever I am and whoever I am with, I will I will always consider myself the lowest of all, and from the depths of my heart hold others dear and supreme." Mm.
지단제나 간소 미래 샘제 둔돌레 nga choy sati kron do da ching mare ti che ina ko ba sir che da tundule nga choy slam na re tundu do nga la la re nga tundule choy slam na ta ta ga su ko ya som tan da sir che da
Mm.
ti ge mo sho ru ta lam sa
Mm.
ina ya ton da ngodol sam da ne tende na mare
Mm. So yeah, when it says, I will always consider myself the lowest of all, it would just seem a bit foolish to, like try to kind of to say or make out like, oh, this creature here, I'm far inferior to that creature, that animal or whatever. It would be quite foolish, but it's not exactly saying that here, I don't think.
어 tingsa youtube na la ya ai gi su me do sam gi
Mm,
demara ai sam gi
mm,
카셰 로 뭐네 이토와 뭔스럽게요 뭐도가
mm,
키도 심이도 선제 담은데도 돔도 군주 돈도래
mm,
릭민라베 소차인데 수수 릭 마임바 소차 차비서로다
mm.
두주 소차비할 그 돈달라 뭐네 깔래 잡샤바 어떤데 뭐 땡기도 왔어 어 땅이 나게 된데 럽션 두르와 단능에 깨졌지 캔송해
Oh, yeah, good.
오다 AI 제가 서버 맨로
No.
섬기도 직전한 뭐네 레스 샘제 돈도를 미tum바기
Mm.
소자직
So
소잡아도
yeah, no,
더 강에 세야
no.
어떤데디 밀레장 하고 어떤데 망고
Mm,
유튜브 나라 통야도
mm,
왔어 드조도 스체 따윤도 아 정말 나 미래데 나 단다 쳐버래 낭배 쳐버지래 특별 준비 쳐래 하던 나란 잡지나 나 치간 마켓이 생이
mm,
미지래
mm,
내 닌데지 그 삼는데 코르 마선다 날래자 뭐네 심제 튼도데 아버지 레도 왔어야지
mm,
땡땡도 왔어
mm. If you look at some of the um, clips or the videos on YouTube, although I know that some of them are maybe just created by AI, but you do see videos of uh, creatures of a different species, animals of a different species, helping each other, protecting each other. And so when I see something like that, it makes me think, they're animals, and I'm a human being, not only a human being, but I'm a practitioner of the Buddha's teachings. Then not just that, but supposedly like I'm a Mahayana practitioner, and that,
가말로 느껴지시기요
no, and in my own case, I'm the one that sits up on the throne, telling everybody else. But look at what these animals do, and it sort of like makes you feel, wow, comparing what you yourself are able to do with what these animals are able to do.
딘데게 차네 셴라 쯔 남주 땐다 셴리야 가서 닝 타번에 셴뱅기 로제다 딘데게 릭망부지 먼저 밀레장 심제 돈을 하바 딘데 여대바 통야도
Mm,
왔어
mm,
어다 드즈테데 아니 초드 제바
mm,
짐바세데 다니 꼴레 맨다시 셴라 초드 진사 규센 드즈테
mm,
삼당세들
mm,
뭐네 규센데메 삼노레스
mm. And so when you see that kind of way of behaving, even amongst diverse types of animal and so on, then that's when I where it says, to see them myself as lowest of all and see the others as supreme. That's the kind of creature, kind of animal that you're thinking, oh, these are just so amazing because they're behaving in a way which is even superior to the way us human beings behave.
Gita gas shunas.
Mm,
Semje ring mitumba tuzo tangbo to yundu. Chawa zigir sans
mm,
dus.
mm,
Ane kodo sing nima chi nima ni sing jeli ya koran zo be de ning yewe trobo chan.
mm, mm,
Ka teta mebe trobo chi chagres.
mm,
Nganzo miti tangbo to yundu gyamo shio kegres.
mm,
Be ene shio nye zumdan tenne nyendo kaba chigres. Ane kecha paa she tsui she, ko samdang tanda nga dama tumba di duwa, ko samdang nga dama, ya di jeli ya, ene di res.
mm,
Nying nyaw tine tarin ru res.
mm,
Tinde tinde tewe inde, semjen tundu shida ya res.
mm.
Tinde duwa yas,
No,
ngone re.
so to give you just an example, you see what'll happen sometimes is you get two creatures, different species. So at the very beginning, they're kind of a little bit wary of each other, maybe growling, that kind of thing. But then when they spend more and more time together, it's like they become really close friends, really fond of each other, like they just don't want to be separated from each other even. Whereas us human beings, quite often you meet somebody the first time, then of course you have this big smile on your face. Then you start to get to know the person. You see, oh, we're different in this way, we're different in that way, we disagree on this and that. And then you gradually feel more and more distant from them.
Oh,
So in that way, it looks like the animals are much better than the human beings, doesn't it?
tinde dus, da kanda tinde lecture le, mangbo dus, yonden le, mangbo dus.
So you can learn a lot, from watching that kind of video and so on.
Oh, oh. Dani kunla menda shenla samba taba yu chotu cheba zimbalo dee duwas. Tindi chi tsawa chida nga lay chunyo. Pena nga dabu chi ina rowa mire. Ani cheba chi re. Rawa, tokwa. Tindi chi yang na yang du korje. Tindi chi chukro chana sambe rawa. Di men ro. Tindi men ro sambe tokwa. Namdo. Semje tundo susu gomda ki chili yebe. Tundo chiti. Gomda la yebe. Tundo chiti. Topje di chogo ya. Macha na. Kibu che ne nye digdo wans.
Mm,
Kibu che ne nye digdo wans.
mm,
Tan chik di kamba bul de mi re.
mm,
Kamba chilo dinge de tundo re. Ta sem ki digi di. Sem ki kange di. Su che du mindu.
mm,
Shine som tanya ji du.
mm,
치 차겐데 남다 싸나 시시라 미디 차겐 시라 야그래 에어 컨디션 단지요 히터 단요 다 쇼다야 레데 셈게 날이야 마키고 쇼지고 망보 여대버지 디 수수 남도 속고 여대버지
mm,
수수 남도 속고 마키고 망보 속고 칠로를 예베 키디 다 마차 지다 마도스 중배이나 배를레체 여대버지
mm,
다 드설 선단 당한 로아 밀치 레버레데 라와다 토바생인데 되게 남도 어디 많다고 되게 콜레 생기디 콜레자 껴도 와서들
mm,
근데 도와스
mm.
근데 도와스 근데 선다야 뭐 도와스
Something I've noticed, when I think I'm a human being, not only that, but I'm a Buddhist, but also, I have so many sorts of thoughts revolving around what I might be able to get to be happy, and worrying and suspicious about what might happen, what some bad thing that might happen. Whereas, like if you have a dog, then the dog, as long as it's sort of had enough food and warm enough, it'll just sleep very happily there, right? It doesn't have all of that kind of like hopes and fears and suspicion and so forth. So if we compare, of course, we have so many luxuries and conditions and good conditions, like if you want the air conditioning on, you put the air conditioning on, the heating and so on. But in a way, that when you think about the mental suffering that we create for ourselves with hopes and fears and so on, compared with animals, like I say, the dog, when it's had enough to eat and it's warm enough, then it'll just lay there without a care in the world, just lay there and sleep. So thinking in that way is like, in some ways, we are inferior to animals.
어, 어떤 데 인자? 응? 단연권의 맨다시 셴라 삼바 타바이 초도 제바 짐발라 없으네. 다 맞교부이 nga kaki shingme se kecha mare. Ta nga kyobu yin sa ta kardusna rangi nal ya kyobu sonyengi rang jin zin ta dang zin di shuk che jung ko thola ene ta dongle che ko du sa ji ta dirwas.
Mm, mm,
Nga saya me kyobu yin nga koya me kyobu yin shibe kecha marwas. Men ta tsa te tiki kecha marwas.
no. So this verse, wherever I am and whoever I am, and so on. Uh, it's not really talking about having some kind of inferiority complex, thinking of yourself as being, rubbish. I don't know anything, that kind of thing. What it's really talking about is cultivating thoughts and so forth that will help you to oppose and overcome your self-cherishing mind and self-grasping mind.
다 딘데치 인도 동네 치당 거 돌라 당부랑 숭티 다 숭거도와 졸음 군도 랑유라 또주 녀모 깨마타 다시 마룬 제베나 젠탑 동네 도블랍스
Mm. Then, that being the case, then next he is talking about how you will protect yourself in the sense of, protecting your own mind. And so there we have verse 3, which says, "In all actions, I shall examine my mental continuum, and the minute a delusion arises, a mental affliction arises, since it endangers myself and others, I shall forcefully confront and avert it."
오, 레 당보와라 냠보 템발레 아니 율방부터 쪼아이스 어 딘데직 숭거를 뒤에 땐데 개청부 찍래 가르르스나 냠보 깨투야기 단다 누데 누톱도 첨부도 요마래 딘데인도 아니 차단계의 유다 타승 붙여야 돼 아니 개쳐버렸어 어
Mm. It's said that for us as beginners, it's more effective to put some distance between yourself and the object that provokes the mental afflictions than actually applying the antidote, because we don't really have the ability to be there with the object and apply the antidote. So it's more practical, more effective to separate oneself from the object.
뭐, 디강들래야 템바다 시신디 시다 개쳐버렸어 전시양양 대한테 전시양양 대한테 개쳐버디 라렌스드는 시다 시디 냠부치 열었어
Mm,
랑게 투바 랑게 마다나 최베 수기 최미 제세베 대출 균도 랑게 투발라 따네 뽕아 야셀라레 있으네 베트 랑게 랑리야 땅에 누추 치기도 했으네 전시에 따야돼 하장 개침을 했으네 디지 숨고도 왔어 딘내 같이 모두 왔어
mm. On top of that, what we need is to repeatedly rely upon, in other words, practice mindfulness and vigilance. So this is really important. And there's a verse in the 37 practices which talks about this very nicely. He says there, the author of that text says there that it's really important to practice mindfulness and vigilance by checking oneself to see what we're doing, whether we're doing something good or bad and so forth. Because if not, if we don't do that, then we might end up looking like a Dharma practitioner, but not really practicing Dharma.
어,
Mm.
녀몽 겁나 예배 도가웨스. 근데 연 직직래 라렌 수둥. 녀몽도 검침이나 오즈맨로 제제 다테란데 충전로 오즈맨로스나
Mm.
검침이나 녀부께바이나 녀부 까토 말스.
Mm.
녀몽 겁나 예배 도가웨스. 전시 전바다 시신이 녀부 천송데스. 차소 녀몽 당부께마다 물좀 제바 자살라렌스. 어, 그 당분은 오즈맨으로 사도 짠이 샤 지금 매버다도스.
Mm.
람사 경기 차지요나 당분 충분해 매 충분해 세븐나시 어떤데 제거했으네. 근데 송구도 왔어.
There's another idea you find in the 37 practices where he talks about the danger of thinking that when the mental afflictions arise, thinking, oh, it's not too bad, it should be okay, because then what happens, so you don't what will happen is that it gets stronger and stronger, because you build up the habit, and then you'll find that you can't stop it by applying the antidote. So instead, we need to practice mindfulness and vigilance all the time, and through that, be aware. Immediately a mental affliction begins to just as soon as it begins to arise, then applying the antidote straight away. And it's very much like uh, putting the fire out as soon as it started, rather than letting it blaze and then trying to put it out when it's too late.
음, 다디 냠래래 자네 구주 첨보요래. 지소지기 야 디기 잘 잡아 있네야. 디데시 자야지 땐데 도와스.
Mm. I
여기 쳐다 만들어 토는 깨제 시합이 있나? 늘 구주 첨보도 왔어.
I think that this can be also applied to our life in society, not just in relation to one's own personal practice. I think it's also very useful.
어, 만도 점불링들라 월피스 학당이지 딱도 왔어.
Mm.
월피스 컨데스 전이 연구랬어.
We talk about world peace, don't we? So how will we be able to achieve world peace?
어, 개목 개발적으로 월피스 차고 말해봤어.
You can't achieve world peace just by
개목 개발적으로
smiling,
되게
just by
월피스
smiling
저거
each other.
차고 말해봤어.
That alone isn't going to bring world peace, is it?
다 말한 쪽 저방 해봐, 자왕 해봐, 되게 디 동네 제자 수가네 점불링 시대 속으로 왔어.
The way to bring about world peace is by stopping our own, let's say, misconduct, our own bad way of acting.
삼농 년배 견제 들을 때네 중에 자왕 해봐, 저방 해봐, 다 되게 추도 추 뉴르 침바이나 나는 뭐네 월피스 차그러 왔어.
If we stop ourselves from having negative thoughts, then there won't be the negative, destructive ways of behaving and doing things, and that's what will bring about world peace.
만조, 건조, 다 되게 상황 견해를 봤어.
Mm. Thinking,
조리체.
no, thinking in a biased way, us versus them. This is a big mistake, isn't it?
만소 사직 냠도 지기 해봤지. 아니 들리야 애는 착당 걸로 어떤 뉴르 당바이나 기부 쉬우지 영향이 시사 들어왔어.
If we cultivate the attitude that it's us, all of us in that sense, then that will have be very helpful in overcoming attachment and anger, and then we'll be able to have a very happy life.
대인들 단대디 점리 시대 두당기 카메라스나야 초그레스 디직.
And so really, this verse is talking about world peace.
졸라면 군도 랑귤라 또지 녀모 야마타 소소야마지고 소그래 미야마지고 디소도 디인자 당신의 마룬 제베나 젠답되네 벳 슉잡제 아니 팀파 충스다야 디톨이야 로종 차오레 승고도 왔어 젠답 동네스 동네체지
It says in all actions, right? I shall examine my mental continuum. I shall examine my mind. And the minute a delusion arises, actually, what it's saying is immediately a delusion arises, a mental affliction arises. Seeing how dangerous it is for myself and others, I shall immediately confront it and work hard, to overcome it.
다 딘데지기 삼노티 다 뭐네 저는 생기 딩네 야지 녀베이나 셴을 never 채워 삼벨로디 다 고잡서지레스
And if you think along these lines, then you'll be kind of closing the door to thinking harmful thoughts towards others.
다 디기 셴을 파 never said 다 고잡어지기다 삼당다 디레스 다 만에버 잠식 마임바 다 펜버 두당 토라 네 심전 탐절 펜버 두세디 치점 그게저 마임바 뭐 라랭 토네 까바이나 다 림보 망보여스
So that's the way of thinking that puts a stop to any kind of intention or wish to harm others. And then what about how to cultivate thoughts where you want to help others? And for this, there are many stages.
다치 교보로부터 냠타로부터 딘데 소자라 펜바체고 삼바데데 로종 마제 나양 그 딘데 랑싱기 딘데 삼노 코데야데 몽고여레스 로종 냠레 메나야 딘데 삼노 코데 몽고여레스 딘데 삼노 코데 밀자 마임바 되게 둔돌라이 두가 성에 라베임바스
Even people who haven't trained in any way in mind training, and as I mentioned before, even animals, they are quite capable of helping other sentient beings, other people other themselves, by giving them food if they're hungry and clothing if they're cold and so forth.
이나양스 단당 안죽게제티 대참식이 닝직게자 말와스 타이 에베 마게 심제 탐제 사야지기 깨제지를 왔어 마게 심제 탐제 사야디나 릭다면도 뭔가 쉬지도 왔어
That that in itself, though, is not really what we mean by compassion, is it? Because when we think about compassion, we're talking about compassion for all the infinite mother sentient beings, aren't we?
다디나라 디치 오마티 랑싱 녜베 심제 당스 랑싱 녜바 사야디 양면은 녜베 소로 양면은 나상 괴내기 나사 예대베기 네바 딘데기 지 예대바로 랑싱 녜베 심제 다 딕두 탁베 낸데베기 지다 강해그리 강해쟁그리 나 딘데지 총소나 깔카보 열다스 네 선제 단절 펜바 두고 삼노지 열때 나좀 거네 이베 강사지 tilles나 네가 가르쳐나 제 콜펜바 두고 사 깔카보 시다레스 나좀 거미요스 딘데지레스 아니 팔이야 지 잠보로지 제든지 제는 등사 옵티즘 생인지 누가 민나 나자 옵티즘 생인지 옵티즘
autism, okay.
옵티즘 딘데 소르지 파 로버트 첸 줄이야 야와 수용매요 줄 간대체 다 텔레 양원에 타네 파 펜버 제바 있느냐 야부 제수 삼베 뭐래매 등에들라 얘네 펜바 양조 닝 타고내야 깨단다 되게 더 렐라 보면도 왔어 근데 인자 랑싱 엠베 심제 지단 심제 이디 렐라 보레테 랑싱 엠베 심제다 디두 타베 넘발라 아니 음 rinchen terta trevashi nyabar kawe jinzin lap sayate lela mare te kawa chigres
Mm.
pemba duya kawa chigres.
And then going on to the next verse, going from there on to the next verse, verse 4, whenever I see sentient beings who are wicked in nature and overwhelmed by negative actions and heavy suffering, I will hold such rare ones dear as if I had found a precious treasure. So when it says overwhelmed by negative actions and when it says wicked in nature, what it's actually talking about is certain sentient beings who might, be like their mind might be unbalanced. I mean, maybe they're crazy, or they have some kind of contagious disease. So suffering, very heavily in that way. So this is talking about one difficult practice because it's easy enough to feel in general, compassion towards all sentient beings. But when you meet with a person like this, perhaps somebody who, if you get into contact with, then you might catch their disease. So really sort of like caring for them and cherishing for them is quite difficult. You feel a bit more like, I have to be careful here because I don't want to catch what they've got. And, there can be some people who have certain forms of autism, maybe who you try to help, but then it might be that in response, they would want to, hit you or, to whack you with a stick or something. So it's really talking about something quite difficult here. No.
다 텔리야 pemba duya ke lok nyingdop chik siya jet tuya chik ngone thane ne nasa tende gone chik le yin yang rang ya teme ki tende ki nyingdop chik ta ane chik shenda ki tan chik pemba duba tanglen me ba ta di len tende chik 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 ne ba du chik chebe na 텔리야 sosen tuya ki tende chik chik nyingdop chik 소설이야 레베 있나 양스 다 디오텔이야
No.
어 달라 생기 차도기 시굴라서 미리베 경가랑기 램바다 자가셴라 보고쇼스네 다 동랭 거직도 왔어 디 딜레 장깔레 카 유지래
Mm.
어
And
유
no.
그래 딱고 레그왕 이나래 코라틴데 tin데 걸 파나한테 당분이네 막아도 지금 깨질 때는 주네 아니 그 매배 있네 그 둘러야다 너바 매배 있네 너바 체스라야다 다 된대기 셰와다 꾸루하다 어떤데기 다 미리 보면 쉬우지 주체스나 텔이야 내 로봇 쳐고 써야 돼다 시작할 가고 지르 봤어 어다 디급들라 란진진디 숙충르다 셴진진디 숙체르 땅토야기 동래디 누버체르 땅고도 왔어
Mm. So there, you have to work particularly hard at overcoming the self-cherishing mind, and then furthermore, in the next verse, when out of envy others mistreat me with abuse, insults, or the like, I shall accept defeat and offer the victory to them. So here, yeah, also, whether yeah, no, yeah, anyway, whether it's because of just one's karma or whether it's uh, whatever the reason might be, although you didn't do any harm, they're criticizing you, maybe because they're ill or whatever it might be, putting up with that kind of harm. So they're criticizing you when you didn't do anything wrong, but they say that you did, or you didn't say something, they say you did, and so on. So this kind of way of when you encounter sentient beings who have that kind of behavior, then it's quite difficult to to really feel that kind of sense of affection and so on. And so you have to work particularly hard to overcome self-cherishing. So this is talking about another difficult practice.
음. 단단 알람치 애니 몸바 chan조조도 샘게도 강국돈도 샘게베 샘제르 메봉바 세지 가상 샌드 샘게 미냐베
Mm,
뉴실라베 나네
mm,
직디디
mm,
슈유 바스 어
mm,
다 크즈시디 엔네 로버체 투사 말에 당에 닝저 곰투사 말에 현다 선전 상황을이야 아니 잠바다 닝저 공부이 크즈시디 같이 나갈 내가 마시마도 아니 이 지금에도 대인배 차네 아니 크즈시디 아니 네 펜바드야다 잠바다 닝저디 곰투사 말에 써야지 갑리 튼데 용접 냥가도 왔어 뒤치기요 말에 아니 튼데기 지 레왕기 든데기 네벨레다 든데 칭인지 충분히나 아니 경도 소설래 엔 캡산드 코로나 때우레스네 게제티레스
mm. Mm. Yeah, so maybe you remember when we were talking about those of you who were here, you might remember what I explained in relation to the generating the wishing mind. We had that part of our as part of our ceremony, the generating the wishing bodhicitta. So there, I mentioned one of the precepts was not to give up sentient beings with one's mind. So what that means is, when you meet with certain sentient beings who are very aggressive to you, harmful, and so on, there really is a big risk that you might think to yourself, this sentient being I can't help. This sentient being I can't feel compassion for. All other sentient beings, but not this one. So, whether it's because of karma or whatever it is, what this is encouraging us to do to avoid that, to avoid the deterioration of one's wishing mind by, feeling that you can't help them and you can't feel compassion for them and so on, is to it's encouraging us to take on the loss and give the advantage or the victory, as we say here.
오다니 카두 텔라스 다 뭐네 타는 남주 대바이 있나야 나바산제베 최근나네 대바이 있나야 셰럽 조다 제베 대바
Mm.
어 잠바다 닝제 주권바 있나야 셰럽 조다 제베 잠바다 닝제 어 드니지 순거 알았어 어따 셰럽 조다 디카두들 고야드 개좀 시부레스
Now, here I want to talk about the idea of uh, how important it is to have wisdom. So, from the side of being a Buddhist, we talk about having faith, but what's really important is to have faith that's combined with wisdom. We talk about loving kindness and compassion, and there also what's really important is loving kindness and compassion that are combined with wisdom.
가게 구조ቹ 넘어져 파난디 주바시나에 다가 파난디 소소 유강가 초바 있나에 다가 왜 가게 구조 맞아 대세게 좀 말했어 경가랑 그 랜스게
And so when I talk about, the combination with wisdom, when it says, I shall accept defeat and offer the victory to them here in your verse 5, it doesn't mean if they were to start beating you with a stick or steal all of your possessions that you're just supposed to sit there and do nothing.
다코 만주 망고지 람상 콩도 란제 엔 동바데 마부찬 엔지 갑대 자가 지 루르 바스 지당 안전 로단데 텐데지 바스
Generally, what we would tend to do in such a situation is just straight away get angry and our face would turn red.
데네 렌치 자가 루르 바스
And we would retaliate, wouldn't we?
레데 코 콩루지 사제 드와 인자 까브레 게제샤다 누투 태자침보 까브레 수수 르브 배추 당당 태자침보 미디 세베 소르보다 시베 소르보다 딘데기 태자침보 마무 루도 왔어 코 콩루디 셰럽미도 왔어
No, no.
콩루토네 랜로야디 셰럽다 제베 랜 마르왔어 디 인자 경기 태자 마무 루도 왔어
The thing is, when you retaliate with anger, then this can bring about so much trouble and so many difficulties that is not the wise way to deal with the situation.
딜레 다 칸이 시드데 렐라부두스 라레카데 마라라카라카부두스 이네다 지당원에 로단로 체베이나 콩로 마사베 토네 셰럽 토다 제베 토네 렌지 다 탑시 세야데 약슈레스
Well, it's easy to say, and I know that personally, I find it quite difficult. But it's definitely the best thing to do is to be to act in such a way in such a situation, to act in a way that is informed by combined with wisdom.
오 다텔이야 콩로 마사베 토네 춤도 제야다 되게도 정말 롱두르다스
Oh,
춤도 고고요나 되게도 강을 롱두르다스 룩tum버리다스
luktan tuparo.
레스 단데 경갈렌스는 구조 짜는 마저 재밌게 말했어 콩로 마사베 토
No. No. Oh, chidanchena. Yes, so these are nobody's saying that if somebody like steals from you and so on that you should not retaliate without anger, but just that you shouldn't even go to the what you apply the laws, sue them or whatever it is. There are legal means to deal with that kind of situation, right? Nobody's saying that you shouldn't do that. That's kind of like the way to do it without getting angry.
다 가시 딘데치기 안에 탑시체나 편도도 민도 디스타 개체슈기 남주드레스
So the thing is, the intelligent thing to do is to really check, what is the benefit of doing this.
다 딘데기 편도 매버치 임바이나스 다경원체 셈자는 딘다와이 네버체 디지 달라 대중 릭스네 준준날 땅에말랑에 ngomanamsu le diniji sabe wangi ngal le diniji memba imbarwas du sambaina semleleche kapsan chigres
So when you see that there's no benefit, then what we can think is along the lines of what also Shantideva says in the Bodhisattva, to think to oneself, I created the karma for this to happen to me in the past, and now that karma is ripening.
dindeji samna kochik dugas that gyusanchi dugas
So that's one reason to think about, isn't it, that helps us there.
ane chitane pepekeje shidanchi yore 종지 라나 캐치 예스 종지 키나 캐치 예스
There's also a Tibetan expression that when you lose out on something, there's also a profit in that.
종지 키바 있나스
something loose, yeah. Then you can get
one profit, yeah. Okay. So it sounds like more like if you accept the loss, there's also one profit.
네.
Oh, kichi. Oh, yeah, there's one profit from
어,
that.
일로 구주시오지 야르스.
And this really, I think, makes a lot of sense.
콩들나무가 캡산 찍으랬어.
One profit you get is not having to get angry.
시대 마주가 캡산 찍으랬어. 시대 마주, 생기 시대 마주가 캡산 찍으랬어.
Also, your mind, your peace of mind not being disturbed.
라니바지 마차야 캡산 찍으랬어.
And there's another profit, which is that you don't create another enemy.
라뚜고 주나 라투즈요 말했어. 라 매버 쏘고 주나 매버 쏘요 말했어.
And there's no way in which you can destroy all your enemies.
찍조스는 니발랑거리 니조스는 숨발리그리 숨조스는 시발리그리스.
Because once you've got rid of one enemy, then there's going to be another one. Then you have to get rid of the next enemy, then there's going to be another one, so that it becomes endless.
텐데 인자 경치 키바이나 캐치여 사데 데레스. 아니 저 치만놈 수이나를 세들 동행 용모가 때때 캡상원에르와.
So that's what it means then when we say that when you accept the loss, then there is a profit. It's profitable. And of course, when you think in terms of the results in future lives, for sure, it's very profitable.
다 뒤치기입니다. 다 때네 강라 다기 팬답에 라와체와 강식이 신도 미리 내잖아요. 신에 담았다 왔라. 텔레기가 깔래카게 열직래. 다 스스 배틀 로주 니슈 숨주 배틀 라와체부체 셈다 녀부체 펜바 바시드 소소 부부도 이나래 다 강당 가이나 딘데지기 수 배트 소다 롱줄이야 아니 다 데베기 아니 견직 제스나스 게 간제지 테스나스 다 델리아 아니 잠바다 자와 말라바사데 렐로찬 마르스.
Yeah, so this one I can't did I read it? The sixth one. Read Chemasong. Yeah, so when someone, so verse 6, this is talking about
some 팬답에
no.
라와체와 강식이 신도 미리 내죠. 신도 미리 봐. 소울인데 봐. 롱주체 가서 롱주 좀 봐. 다 된대.
No. So verse 6, this is talking about something which is really difficult, maybe the most difficult thing. When someone whom I have benefited and in whom I have great hopes gives me terrible harm, I will regard them as my virtuous friend. So there could be somebody who maybe for virtuous friend like Shenyan. Gewi Shenyan. No.
다시 약속했다고 그랬어.
Yeah, so it could be somebody that you've been caring for 10 years, helping them in everywhere, help them so much. It could be 20 years, 30 years. And then they do something. So you had so much hopes for them, and yet now what they do is they harm you really in a really awful way. Maybe completely taking or destroying all your possessions, even harming your life. Then what this is talking about is to regard that person as the best of the gurus, the best of virtuous friends. No.
다 근데 섬다지를 봤어. 다 강다를 서변냠내 제국이었나? 너베땡에 지금 서변냠내 용그를 마도 지기 편바 룸녀지라 서변냠내 와 여말 봤어. 다 뜻뜻 뭐내르다스.
The thing is, if you want to practice patience, you have to practice it with somebody who harms you. You're not going to be able to practice patience. You're not going to be able to develop patience with people that help you, are you?
다 딘데지 임베차네. 마스베 퍼진 죽이냐면 다 딘데지 갑라. 곰베 갑라. 땅에 서버 곰베 땡 초도 줘지. 다니 삼바지. 딘데지 다 곰바샤 개정부 임바다스.
And so the way to think that he's advising here is, you're trying to practice 6 perfections, so I want to practice 6 perfections. That includes being able to practice patience. So this person is the perfect basis for me to be able to practice patience.
다 딘데기 삼로 딘데지 레발라 몰람 잡아치고 리그 말해 규체만 뭐 시에베 터는 거래 딘데 인도 중주고 리우 투바 서베 퍼지 서베 리우티 터려야 에네 삼로 땅땅 그런 봐 시부지 샘덴레 중에 너발이야 서버검다 세멜레 중에 너바 중탕라 서버검다 다 되게디 아니 서서 정달체네 아니 강에 가르쳐 보다 엔 디페주 땅거 왜 알았어
And being able to think in this way is not going to come simply as a result of praying for it to happen, praying to be able to do that. You have to really think a lot in many different ways. And so for that, there is the 6th chapter of the Bodhisattva, whole chapter devoted to how to deal with patience, how to overcome anger, whether it's in relation to animate objects or inanimate objects. Lots of things to think about, reasons to think of, not to get angry.
다 이해하는 거네 내가 담아대냐랬어 중중날로 든지 숨고도 왔어 갈때 하다 함이다 탐제 달라 달랑자 대다 기간 날매베 메나티지 주민주 녀모 dob제 라디네 강난내나 르럽자 타와이 있는 미네베 데르다 기치지를 돌스 다든지 용야대 용고 말해 딱거 unpossible 레디 숭야 든지 숭거래 하다 미다 소자 용수 좁어 날 달라란제 날 너베케베 있나야 ngangесонla 마유고 마르다스 육투그 마르다스 ngangесонla 육투그 마르다스 ngare 귤유베 콩로 라진지 당시 되게 괜찮네 깨지지를 남매마 사다지 어디치그르다스 어디송도 왔어
No.
어디송네 때말에
No. So here also there is one verse in the Bodhisattva which is very effective to think about. Shantideva says that, although it would be completely impossible, just suppose all of the human beings and gods, every single living being were to turn into my enemies, they wouldn't be able to throw me into the lower realms. They wouldn't be able to force me into the lower realms. But one moment of my own anger can do that. In one moment, the one moment of anger has the ability to throw me into the lower realms. It's true, isn't it?
다드네 탐지 떼벽원에 송야대 유생 전부도 왔어. 펜스 떼네 열었어. 아니 다그 루충 지부디그 천충 안 된대지는 내 루솔 내버티 충분했어. 디제 마도 징에 루드 메버 거치고 다치고 천디치고 갈네야 되게 말했어. 펜스 떼와한 그 충을 했어한테 다니기네 룽충았어. 어떤데 숨도 도서강은 거네 대만 땡데랬어.
And if you think about it, what it says there is also true. It says that if you think about the dependent nature of things, this also helps to overcome that anger because, the being harmed.
그래서 쿠이견 레소스는 누구도 독적으로 왔어. 대자네 믿었어. 제가 소설 띄우도 왔어.
We immediately think when somebody harms us, it's their fault. Actually, in one way of thinking about it, it comes partly from oneself and partly from them because it's a dependent arising. Oneself being harmed, receiving physical harm and so forth. It's a dependent arising. What does it depend upon? Partly on my body and partly on their weapon, whatever it is they're using to hurt me. If my body wasn't there, however many weapons they have, then the harm wouldn't happen. So it comes as a dependent arising depending upon both of those. And that's true, isn't it?
다 더레스. 원전 전에잖아. 내가 쉬어져래. 만속 남바이나래. 남바 마임바초 이나래. 간다 철 대바이나 샤과 푸스야지 도왔어. 샤과 푸스. 당연히 너두체스. 너두드 톨샤스지. 디두 소소당 노트니 더 가가 소도 왔어. 노트그 샘니 더 가가 소도 왔어. 단 노트 샘그 꾸네람베 노트그 자와티 아니 단 톨샤스네. 스스 당 스스 샘기 노트기 공론체네 자와티 아니 샤바푼 그니 가가지고 소도 왔어. 파 달라야 등이 가가 소금이도 왔어. 그 독자 치기도 쓰네. 그 자와티 독자 치기도 쓰라고미도 그 독자 치기도 쓰라고도 등이 가가 소금도 소소 잠들래나 가가지고 소도 왔어. 디디 정보 말했어. 딘데 인자 준주고 치기 나라. 콩로사세 다티 아니 때와도 가봤사기 봤어. 너제 뭐 나사 땅에 이날 가리나 육발라서 뭐걸 때스네. but 육바티 슈베이나 나사 뭐 땅에데 야바 들어봤어. 야발로 콩로사가미도 콜로 콩로사가도 티 가르쳤네스. 무슨 나사티 야바게 쓰고도 왔어. 육발라서 뭐체 중내체를 토셔놨어. 다 가테 딘데 이나스 그 야바 말이 야바 융에데 미티기 드레스 딘데 이나 코 말에 그 난기 심규 마투에 녀모티기 레바스 딱 뭐네 집었잖아 그 규기 녀모티 자와티 꾸내라 꾸론들이야 집어서 거르마도 콜 집어서 말해봤네 대대 마시고지도 왔어.
There also we find, in Buddhist and non-Buddhist traditions, we find this idea of confession, right? Confessing to having made a mistake. And when we do that, we actually make a difference between we're able to separate ourselves from what we've done. We confess this bad action that we did, and that mistaken way of thinking. We're able to separate them. But when it comes to the enemy, we're not really able to do that, are we? The person harms us, we don't think this person just did a harmful action. We don't think in that way. We think he or she did that. So this is not really very honest to think in that way. You can make the separation with yourself, but you don't make the separation with others. So here it's good to think about what Shantideva says in the guide, in the Bhajavatar. He says, so what is it that you're going to get angry with? What are you getting angry with? If you're going to get angry with what's actually harming you, then your anger should be directed at the stick. But of course, we're going to say, no, I'm not going to get angry with the stick. I'm angry with the person that's controlling the stick, that person. So then Shantideva's reply to that is, well, in that case, why don't you get angry with the bad mind or the bad motivation of that person? Because it's that motivation which is controlling that person. And if you think about those things, they're really quite true, aren't they?
tela sobe samnotane ane soba gomeaki ta yusemangbolegi yoris. Tinde inza Shantideva sungo yoris. Dunghe meba menjung ngenjung mes dunghe jilene ane ngenjung dikya goris. Dunghe meba menjung ngenjung mes dewe semgyo tembarnus. ane dunghe nazo chungwadi ko bala ningjeje digla zemshin galaga 어떻게 그런가 ane 용그레스. 대인자 먼저 지 강행이 뭐 총어디 그 갱에버디 돌 캐야기 답시 뭔거요 알았어.
Thinking about those and many other reasons that you can discover, this all helps us to overcome anger, to stop ourselves getting angry. And again, like Shantideva says, without suffering, then you can't generate renunciation. So he says that seeing that without suffering you can't generate motivation, mind remain firm, remain calm, remain firm.
되게 찍찍 로마서. 샤야 둥에 연대네 교회 주버 세버체
Uh-huh.
코발라 닝지게 딕라 점신 갤라가스
Yeah, there's a verse in that. There's this verse in which Shaniteva kind of lists the benefits of suffering. So one is that without suffering, you can't generate renunciation. So that's one of the benefits of suffering, that it helps you to generate um, uh, renunciation. Then it helps you to understand the suffering nature of cyclic existence. It helps you to develop compassion towards others, and it also helps you to avoid destructive actions, and makes you like engaging in the constructive or virtuous actions.
다 네게 셈디야야 장제 아니 아니 로트 콤소나 아니 가리나 잉자종나 아니 가리나 지레 로트 종 세레 세지어레 다 겐능가면도 다디 아니 군조부기 토네 아니 냠랭기 토네 로종기 냠랭데 다 되게 주드위 말에
Mm.
알지르베 너는 무슨 규베 있어들베 너는
Donagas,
무슨
no,
규베이
Jhado.
펜데 만은 꼴을 마이 내다 동해고 사회 달라 렘버쇼스
Mm.
렘버럽스
Remember love, no.
어따디 동란테르바다
No. And if you keep practicing that way, then you'll become more and more habituated in it. And then then really you start seeing signs of success in your practice that are talked about in the 7-point mind training. So then, besides that, in terms of the convention, working on the conventional level, we have verse 7, which says, "In short, both directly and indirectly, I offer every happiness and benefit to all my mothers. I shall secretly take upon myself all their harms and sufferings."
다 텔라 에네 렘바트 겔체 동아티 젤체 렘바 동 ingen lemba
No.
ane le tang dunge gi gu migewa ya lemba ane getsa tang longje tong rebe
Longje.
longje tong le tong longje tong ta tene dunge gu pacha ta cheba ya lemba ane getsa ta pa tang o ta tus chene chu lemba naga mendo sumda pa tang mendo sum terwa le tang longje tong getsa tong chu lemba ter digba tang digbe gu migewa tang ane pacha ta cheba lemba
Here, when it talks about yeah, okay. Well, anyway, it's talking about taking and giving, right? So don't I'm going to give you a penny. Anyway, it's talking about taking and giving. Of these two, taking and giving, in the Tibetan it's donglen, so which is giving and taking, but the actual order that we practice is taking and then giving. So there are 3 for each of these. So you take on the suffering of the sentient beings and give them your body. Then you take on the causes of suffering of the sentient beings and give your possessions. Then you take on even the imprints, the more subtle imprints of the cause of suffering and the mental afflictions, and give your virtuous roots.
다 동랭이고 빼말장 레베코르 라네 잠스 딘데 종다르테 당고 셴리야 제발라 녜라 아니 랑팅기 아니 지 공다 지 용유기 지 나자르고 강인 게로 되게 아니 쇼가리야 랜도 어 딘데 랑팅도 종다르 차고레스 레베코르 라네 잠스
It's advised with the taking and giving that we what do you call it? Alternate the two, or alternate the two. And then also it talks about starting with oneself. So in other words, starting the taking and giving practice with oneself, So, for example, in the morning, you could think of, the meditation could be on taking your own suffering that's going to happen later on in the day, and so forth.
그래. 배는 아주 부춘중 갑리야. 롭종 체할 믹세 미 있는 내주 카가래. 망쳐 점자야 가그르마도 롭종 체할 깔 카그르와스 산이 사페마레 니마르스나 기타 치그르와스 산이마 조조 유두 다야 산이 랍다 도그르와스 야 깔 카그르와스
Although there are exceptions, generally speaking, with children, what they most like is to play. They don't really like to study. So when Saturday and Sunday are just around the corner, then they're really happy. They're looking forward to the weekend, and then as the weekend draws to an end, and they start thinking about, oh, now I've got to go back to school and study, right? They
더 망쳐 드리지 열와스
mostly like that, right?
그 가르치는 랍달이야 근데 깔려 잡도 거 가르치는스 부춘주도 근데 랍달 깔려 잡도 거 가르치는스
So why do the kids have to go to school and work hard to learn?
어 개인백값을 강했어야 돈달라 중학교를 강해야 되게 어려웠어.
They have to go through those difficulties when they're young in order to uh, prevent suffering later on in their life when they're older.
뒤다 찍어봤어. 충두 배 로종망부 쳐야 돼. 개인백값을 아니 믿고다 냠도 풍부시 로트위하게 강했어야 지금 돈달라 충두 로종 잡으러 봤어. 다 렘백 걸어라는 잠새는 뒤져버렸어.
So this is similar, actually, this idea of starting with oneself. It's the same kind of idea that the kids having to study and work hard when they're young, so that when they're older, everything will work out all right for them.
다 되는지 뭘 찾아. 다 되네. 돈 넘을 때는 다 순구여야 말이다.
Not it. So those are all working with the conventional level, those 7 verses. Then working on the ultimate level, you have verse 8.
대다 군자 최계기 또베 팀에 마바신 죽은 규마르 셰벨로 셰메 칭월레 돌랍스 대다 군자 최계기 또베 팀에 마바바데 냠샤 나가도 좀수 대체 죽은 규마르 셰벨로 셰메 칭월 세 랍세데 에네 제도 규마도 아니 동료 공주 대체 어떤 얘기 드레스
The 8th verse says, also shall not defile, or I will not defile all these practices with the stains of the superstitions of the 8 worldly concerns. Anyway, it says that. And by knowing all phenomena to be illusory, without trusting in them, I shall free myself from bondage. So the first 2 lines are talking about the space like meditative equipoise, deep meditation on emptiness. And then the last 2 lines are talking about the post-meditation illusory like wisdom.
다 대다군자 최계기 승에데 직된 최계 라 아니 승구 요레 삼바 근데 삼kan 요레스 로종 체계기 셰베나라 체바이나 레바나라 체바이나 아니 단데디 나란서 남주 차전 대학이 고물로 주자와 셔라기 강기 딱제 다 게다다야 드레스
Yes, yes. The thing is, you see it. Anyway, there are some people you see in the Tibetan it says just Chogye, which it means the 8 dharmas. It doesn't actually say 8 worldly dharmas, but there are some people who think that when it says the 8 dharmas, that it means the 8 worldly dharmas. But actually, if you look in the commentaries to the 8 verses, it's clear that the 8 dharmas are the 8 that we go through at the beginning of the teachings, where that's the verse from Nagarjuna, where it talks about being free of the elaborations, the 8 elaborations. I don't know if it mentions the number. You know that verse that we recited at the beginning of the teaching?
내 관계 땡진 잡아줘. 가봐매봐, 깨매봐, 쳐봐매봐, 따매봐, 옹화매봐, 로매봐. 다대투미, 던지미, 쏘다 때려봤어.
So those 8.
어, 어,
Yeah, anyway.
어,
So anyway, it lists 8 things, you know, like free of being one and many and etc.
다 개인기란 될 토치 잡으러.
No, no.
ngōla tēbe kiangāñi.
Kiengakni, los.
ngōla tēbe kiangāñi.
Los.
Kāpa mēba, kia mēba. gyūla tēne 딱체ñi, chebatāng tākwañi. Tā yūla tēne rōñi.
No.
Tā tēne yūla tēne 찍다 다체 단다메 로바 여바다 로바 메바 찍다 타데
디아 율르더
오규율 달테바 달테바 어테레
No.
어타테레
No. Yeah, so that's better. So actually what they are, of course, you know, you can see the list in the verse, but to also explain a little bit, you've got in reference to the sort of fundamental, the essential nature of things, they are free of ceasing and cessation and production. So that's the first 2 that are mentioned. Then in terms of their causes, then they are free of being permanent and what do you say? Anyways, Jeba is like annihilation. Yeah, okay, annihilation. That's a good one. Thanks. Thank you. And no annihilation and no permanence. Is that where you got it from? Then in terms of the place, being free of coming and going. And then in terms of the sort of like kind of like literally something like a companion, like what do you say for da? Yeah, but anyway.
Robert.
It's not exactly a pair. It's like the other side of the pair. You know, you've got one thing together with another. So anyway, free of what was the other one? Yeah, I guess I was saying we could say in terms of like number, then being free of one and many. No. So those are the. What he's saying in that verse, Nagarjuna, is that you can't find anything anywhere existing from its own side. So it's saying, or he's saying that you know, however you look at things, you can't find anything which is existing from its own side. You know, even if you look from the point of view of these 8 possibilities, you can't find anything existing from its own side. Since there is nothing that exists from its own side in these 8 ways and so forth, then you have the possibility of this deep meditation, meditative equipoise on emptiness, the emptiness of existence from its own side, which is like space.
다 매버르베 슬라비나 다 아니 녜고로 똥바니 녜뱅올라 군조가 나왔대 매베 똥산지 레데 추제 매베 디마르바스 추제인데 여대바치레 어딘데 유루 여단데 가르레 민가 왕기 여점 아니 타녀 왕기 샥삼 어딘데 지레스 다웨 숭예 나시레스 추낭기 다웨 숭예 나시레스.
Then if things don't exist at all from their own side, which is something that in the context of this meditation, something that you've realized nothing exists from its own side. Does that mean that therefore the thing doesn't exist at all? In other words, is there no thing which is empty? And the answer, of course, is yeah, there is still the thing which is empty, the thing which doesn't exist from its own side, that thing does still exist. But then how does it exist? Well, it exists as a mere, as a mere name, as a mere imputation, merely posited by names and terms and so on, and is just like the reflection of a moon in water.
멜론난게 숭에 춘난게 나왔네 시레스.
It's like a reflection of a face in the mirror, or it's like the reflection of the moon in water.
디인자 죽은 유마르 셰벨로 셰메 칭월레 돌쇼스.
And therefore, as it says here, knowing that all phenomena are like illusions, without trusting them, I shall be freed. I shall free myself from bondage.
따띠기 로존스 게디 따뜻 드네질 차인 거야 뒤에 들어가질 레기도스.
No. So actually, I finished the explanation of the 8 verses, and we've also finished the time.
야. 다 간다르 안에 같이 두두 수순들 종다체 안에 딜이야 샘다 녀부체 안에 몰람 순제 자위야지 땡땡이 버스 디체바이나 세 딜레이 핑거라 자와치만 남소야 바자샤야지레스 안에 고 싱뇽뇽인자 안에 고 니르신도 니 종다체야를 펜보여로스.
Please do work with these 8 verses and get through working with them, thinking about them and so on, get closer to them. And even praying to be able to practice in this way is really good, and it's going to help you in this life, and you're going to be creating really powerful imprints for future lives. And since it's so short, very few words, then this something really lends itself to daily recitation and meditation.
ngaran 속에 미세디기 땅원에 다네기 지 냠랭기 닝부 내가 강리 자르윤도 또응하게 털어 로고도 왔어.
When you really want to do something, use your life in a very useful way, in the most useful way, then it comes down to practicing according to the 5 forces.
딘데인도 또응하게 가르르세인도 창주구셈 돈담 창주구셈 군조 창주구셈 디게디 고내 공도 피하가 돈달라 소사야 가로사뱅기 또 안에 대 안에 양양 다 공패 로고도 선네 펜바다야 펜베도 달래 양양 곰리체야 곰베도 다 닝원에 다네 니칭이야 가투이네야 니다 만데버지 용화 쇼스는 몰람접 몰람기도 어두선 로고도 왔어 안 대민튼초 지 란진진다 당진다 두솔이야 같이 두두기 동래체야 돼 남아 순진베도 없어.
And what the 5 are is the power of the white seed, which means creating merit as much as you can in order to be able to develop the conventional and ultimate bodhicitta more and more. And then, so that's the first one. Then the power of the plan, which is a determination to never be separated from those 2 bodhicittas, and to constantly familiarize with oneself with them, meditate on them. So that's the power of familiarity. And to pray, make prayers to never be separated from these practices. So that's the power of the prayer, the 4th one. And then constantly going into thinking about the destructive nature and the disadvantages of self-cherishing and self-grasping, which is the the power of destruction. No.
Yeah, that is
So we'll stop there then. Saji bagi joshi metotra rirablin jini de gemba de sange jindu mite buwai dokun namda jing Shaba jo edam guru ratna mandala kamni dayami janju zimjo rinpoche magye pana giguji gyaba nyamba mebai kone gondo baba jo agare rawe kowe shingandi bendan dewa mat jongwe. Gyazo yi shabe si te bato ten gyoro chi.
자기도 나도 살았다니지. 살았다면 살았다면도 야 여기 피어 야 이거 기 아니라
Yeah.
시아나
I don't know if something usually does it. But we did have a heater on, but it was so crazy. No, we did. I know, I think it's